As we work with different number types, integers, fractions, now decimals, we learn order of operations, and then we learn how to use them within application problems. This is yet another example of having been introduced to the basic foundation of application problems. So the only thing that we're changing is we're using decimals now instead of fractions or integers. So not learning a new strategy, we're just using different number types. Now, I always say when I'm doing application problems that I do one read through. I find if I do more than one read through, I end up sort of getting into this cycle where I just keep rereading, and it just gets more and more confusing because I start getting more stressed. So I allow one read through, and then I go and I identify what's important. Remember that math is a language. It's just a language of numbers. So like any language, we translate. So in this case, we're translating from English words to mathematical symbols. We can translate that. We can show that so that anything that we don't need in creating our mathematical sentences, we can cross it off and ignore it. It wasn't until I started thinking of it as a language that I started being able to feel like story problems or application problems were manageable. So here's my one read through. I have you and some friends went to a movie. Each of you spent $19.25 on tickets and food. How many people were in your group if your group paid a total of $134.75? All right, there's actually a lot we don't care about here. That first sentence, it says you and some friends went to a movie. I'm going to go ahead and just cross that off. Once I've crossed that off, I'm going to move to the next sentence, and if there's anything that I need, I'm going to go ahead and underline that. And sometimes I'll write whatever it is above the sentence if there's space, or below if there's not. So the next sentence says, each of you spent $19.25 on tickets. That is very important. So each person spent that amount of money on tickets and food. How many people were in your group? That is the question that I'm trying to answer. And then here it says that the group spent a total of $134.75. The next question is, what operation do I use to figure out the answer to that question? I want you to think in terms of parts and wholes. So we have been given the whole quantity, the amount, the total cost of the event. I'm going to go ahead and write that down. 134.75. That's the whole. Now I need to figure out or see the part. Notice I'm using the language of fractions, and we know that fractions are the same as division. By using that language, it can help me see how I lay everything out. So the whole amount spent was $134.75. The part that each person paid was $19.25. That means if I run division, it's going to give me how many people were there, because in order to know how many people were there, basically I'm saying, well, how many times do I add $19.25 together to get to the total? The number of times I add it together is the number of people that paid it. All right, so when I run this calculation, I get 7, which means 7 people were in the group. So for number 3, we're going to do the same thing. I am also going to, and I'm purposefully using different colors because they can help draw my eye to the important things. So I always encourage students to have a colorful exam, colorful homework, because it shows that you are doing things to try to draw your eye to information that you need and hopefully have you pay less attention to the things that you don't. So my one read through, I encourage you to pause the video, try this problem, and then go ahead and watch it. This would be a good place to test and see how well you're understanding these. So my one read through, I have at the store, apples cost $3.25 per pound. Bread costs $4.75 per loaf. And milk costs $5.55 per gallon. If you bought 2 pounds of apples, 3 loaves of bread, and 2 gallons of milk, how much did you spend in total on groceries? Right, I'm going to switch to orange because it stands out a little bit better for me. So is it at the store, apples cost $3.25 per pound. Bread costs $4.75 per pound. Milk costs $5.55 per pound. So that again, so that's the unit rate. That's the cost per one item type. Here it says that we buy 2 pounds of apples, 2 loaves of bread, and 2 gallons of milk. The question is what the total of the groceries is. I'm going to, just as I underlined these as individual things, I'm going to put them together individually, and then I'll combine them at the end to find the total. If apples cost $3.25 per pound, and I bought 2 pounds of apples, well, I would do $3.25 plus $3.25, or do a more efficient calculation and multiply that by 2, because remember, repeated addition is the same as multiplication. Now I'm going to run that calculation, and that will give me the total I spent on apples. And that gives me $6.50. Okay, so I'm done with my apples. I'm just going to cross those off. Now I'm moving to the loaf of bread. So I purchased 3 loaves of bread, so 3 times the cost per loaf, $4.75. Now the first one, I included the dollar sign. The second one, I'm not within the calculation to reduce that potential confusion. The messier things get, I find that it's harder to keep track. So in this case, I'll put the dollar sign for the answer once I multiply this. And again, I'm using multiplication because it's more efficient than just adding over and over. But that is a method that you could use. However, you do want to get comfortable using multiplication because eventually you have to do it, really, because you could be adding 150 things together, and you don't want to be doing that one at a time. That would take forever and have such a high probability of mistakes. All right, I have calculated the cost of the 3 loaves of bread. So now I've moved to the gallons of milk. So 2 gallons of milk times the cost of a gallon of milk, which is $5.55. I add my dollar sign, and then I run my calculation, and I get, so my calculator shows this, but remember that money is always rounded to the 100th, so you need to add that 0. This gives me the individual costs for each item type, and then to figure out the total, I need to just add all those together, which I am now going to do. I get my $6.50 plus $14.25 plus $11.10, and that gives me a total of $31.85. So organization is really, really important. My organization was the one read through. I'm going to actually write this down. One read through. Step 2 is reread and mark the important information. And mark important info. A little shorthand here. Once I do that, I've set up the expression for each item type. So, or create expression for each item type, category. That's a more, formal term, but we'll stick with type. And then we go ahead and simplify for answer. So anytime you have an application problem, these are the steps that you're going to follow. The 2 steps that make all the difference in the world is not repeating your full read through, just doing it once, and then marking the important stuff. If you find that between steps 2 and 3 you struggle, that's likely a vocabulary thing. So I would go back and double check, review the vocabulary of math and how it translates over.